I know perfectly well what the difference is supposed to be, Dr. Marsden. I just question whether the difference between the two countries is as great as your so-called free press believes it to be. Your business criminals are just slightly more subtle, that's all. The results are very similar. It's what happens with capitalism. Welcome to Behind the Bottom Line. I'm James Schofield, the creator behind the quirky stories that keep you coming back to this podcast. And now in Season 9, I have a new project, a thriller called 7 Continents. Come and find out about the darker facets of diamonds, not just the cliché's girl's best friend, but the cause of greed, corruption and murder. Meet Kirill Solokov and Macey Church, investigators from Capstan Consultants, determined to unveil the truth behind a series of strange events that threaten the reputation of Sir Gilbert Villiers, the seemingly untouchable CEO of 7 Continents, a diamond mining giant. In episode 2, Kirill found it wasn't so bad meeting his ex-fiancée Tatiana as he had feared. Her husband, Sir Gilbert Villiers, introduced Kirill and Macey to his friend Dr Roy Marsden, head of Eco-Warriors, and showed them a huge diamond that seems to be connected to everything weird that is going on. But who found it, and where does it come from? Make sure you're sitting comfortably, and let's find out. Chapter 5. Something from the past. Macey was the first to say something. Wow! May I? Villiers nodded, and she leant forward, picked up the box, and held the stone to the light, with a professional gleam in her eye. Excellent cushion cut. Amsterdam, I suppose, rather than India. Carat size, I would guess in the low hundreds. Clarity, somewhere between flawless and very, very slight inclusions. I'd need an eyeglass to be sure. But the colour is sensational. What is it, pale rose? Where did it come from? Australia, I suppose. Marsden, Villiers and Kirill looked at her with amazement. She smiled. Oh, I put myself through college working as a shop assistant at Tiffany's in New York. I figured it was the only chance a girl like me had of being best friends with a diamond. You're quite right in your description, Macey, but this stone is not from Australia. Marsden spoke for the first time and sat back in his chair, enjoying Macey's surprise. It has to be, she replied. That's the only place in the world that has pink diamonds. That was the only place, but this comes from somewhere further south. Marsden stood up and went over to the neoclassical mantelpiece above the fireplace. Let me explain. The organisation I work for, Eco-Warriors, specialises in carrying out environmental impact audits. For the last 5 years, we've been carrying out an audit on behalf of the United Nations to examine the effect of climate change on Antarctica. I was responsible for the section of the report on Macquarie Sound, and while I was there about 3 years ago, I came across what could be the biggest diamond mine find since Gilbert here discovered the long-kept mine in Indonesia. This little beauty, he picked up the diamond from the table, was exposed by the falling away of glacier ice. I brought it to Gilbert, and as you can see, he's had it made into something really special. The lenses of his glasses reflected the light from the diamond, so that his eyes seemed to glitter greedily. Until now there's been a total ban on mining in Antarctica, continued Villiers. Now this makes sense if you think of how irresponsibly other companies, Durban Diamonds for example, behave towards the environment. But Seven Continents is different. We've always made it clear that one of our primary concerns in all our operations is sustainability. A substantial percentage of our profits go every year into ecological projects. That's why I believe that we're the right people to develop this site. And is that why you're talking at the United Nations in 2 weeks' time? Said Macey, gradually seeing where the conversation was leading. Correct. I've practically convinced them it can be done sensitively and sustainably. So we've submitted an offer for a mining project. We've got the support of eco-warriors, thanks to Roy, and I believe that the excellent relations I've got with the British government and a large number of governments in countries where we already have operations means I can rely on their support if it comes to a vote. But I simply cannot afford even the breath of any scandal at the moment. UN regulations means that other companies have to be allowed to make an offer too. Like who? Asked Kirill. Durban Diamonds, answered Marsden. They have cleaned up their act in recent years, mostly as a result of pressure from Gilbert here. He's the one who made green issues important in the diamond business by including an environmental impact report with every bid. So now, Villiers interrupted. Yes, well, they're desperate to win this contract and will use anything they can against Seven Continents. You have to find out what these messages, he waved his hands at the sundry objects lying on the table, what they all mean, and stop them. He snapped shut the lid of the jewel box, and the room became greyer. He walked back to the safe and replaced it once more. There was a brief silence. Macey leant forward, collected up the different objects and put them in their bag again. Do you mind if we keep these, Sir Gilbert? She asked. Please take them. I don't need any of that rubbish. Thanks. Do you have any idea where they may be coming from? Well, one or two ideas, perhaps. You see, I think that... The doors to the library flew open, and framed by the light behind her stood Tatiana. Gilbert, you are a dreadful host. These two haven't been shown to their rooms yet. You take Kirill to the blue guest room, and Macey, you come with me. Villiers went to the door and put his arm around her waist. Of course, Tanya, you're quite right. And where should I put Roy? Oh! Tatiana looked nonplussed for a moment. Dr. Marsden, I didn't realize you wanted to stay. Marsden stood and bowed his head to her. No need to worry, Lady Villiers. I'll drive back to London after dinner. I don't wish to put you out. Right. I mean, it's no trouble. If you want to stay, you can, of course. Oh, well, that's fine then. Macey, come this way. Gilbert, you take Kirill. I've had the bags put in your rooms already. Dinner will be in an hour, and cook told me we should be punctual, or she won't answer for the consequences. She took Macey's hand and led her up the stairs from the library to her room. It looked over the front of the house and was decorated with pale pink and white striped wallpaper. On the wall was a small seascape from a minor impressionist painter, and the dressing table and mirror were Art Nouveau. Macey was enchanted. Tanya, this is just beautiful. I don't want to stay here. I want to live here. Tatiana looked pleased. I wasn't sure if I should put you and Kirill in the same room. Gilbert told me that your boss had said you were very close, but we weren't sure what that meant exactly. I mean, we could move him here if you wanted. No, Kirill's a nice guy, but that's all. And anyway, even if there was more, I'd want to have this room to myself. I've sat next to him in meetings which have gone on too long. He snores." Tatiana laughed and sat down on the end of the bed. "Well, that's fine then, and I'm glad you like the room." She hesitated for a moment, looked carefully at Macey, and seemed to come to a decision. "Macey, can I ask you a question? Did Kirill tell you anything about how we knew each other before? Before I met Gilbert, I mean." "Well, he told me you were engaged, but that he broke it off. He thought it wouldn't work out with you both travelling the world all the time." "I see. Did he tell you about the letter I wrote him? No? Ah, how discreet of him. I wrote to him and said I'd give up dancing abroad if he wanted. But he said I was young and naive and that we both owed it to art for me to be a famous ballerina. I cried for a month." "But it turned out okay for you, didn't it? I mean, you had a great career. Now you have 2 really cute kids, this beautiful house. And Gilbert seems like a great guy." "Yes, he is. He can be very charming, very funny. He was the first man who could make me laugh after Kirill. Just at the moment he's so worried about this whole business with the messages." "Oh, yes." Macey opened the bag and spread the objects Villiers had collected out on her bed. "Do you have any ideas what the connection is between these things?" Tatiana shrugged her shoulders. "Maybe they have something to do with Kazakhstan. Gilbert worked there before I knew him, and he visited it many times on business. In fact, you see this program for Swan Lake? That was the night we first met. He was in Dosk on some business." "Really? Do you know what about?" "Well, something with diamonds, of course. That's all I know." Tatiana picked up the program and started leafing through it. "I miss dancing, you know, but it's such a short career. So many of my friends are now reaching their end and they have nothing apart from sore feet, back injuries, and no idea what to do next." She opened the program. "Oh, how strange! It has my autograph in it." Suddenly she gasped, looked at the page more closely, and then turned to Macey. "Look." She held it out to her. Scrawled across a picture of the young Tatiana, posed on point in the role of the Swan Princess Odette, were some lines in black Cyrillic script. "What does it say, Tanya? The only Russian I ever learned was in Dr. Zhivago." It says, "To Ekaterina, best wishes, Tatiana Kerkomenova." Chapter 6. Stress for Dinner. When Macey arrived in the drawing room a short time later, she found Kirill sitting on the sofa with Pavel and Catherine either side of him, reading them a chapter from Winnie the Pooh. "A week?" said Pooh gloomily. "What about meals?" "I'm afraid no meals," said Christopher Robin, "because of getting thin quicker. But we will read to you." Macey sat and listened until he had finished. The children begged for another chapter, but their nanny appeared and chased them upstairs. "Well, that's a talent I didn't know you had, Kirill. Does the boss know?" "I put it on my resume. She promised if an opportunity arose with one of our clients, I'd be the first choice. Sir Gilbert began reading, but he got a phone call, so I just took my chance." Villiers re-entered the room with Tatiana, closely followed by Marsden. "Kirill, thank you so much. Always happens. Just as I start something with the kids, I get called away. Now, let me get you some drinks." He bustled around, looking after everybody. Marsden sat himself next to Macey on the sofa, much closer than she found comfortable, and grilled her about her work. She envied Kirill, who was standing with Villiers and Tatiana. Villiers was being charming, and from what she could see, Kirill was enjoying himself. Tatiana was mostly quiet, but occasionally her laugh, much louder and deeper than Macey would have predicted, filled the room. After what seemed like an age, though the grandfather clock in the corner showed it was only 10 minutes, the cook appeared at the door and told them that if they didn't come to the table immediately, then their dinner would be ruined. Macey jumped from the sofa, relieved to be able to join the others. She found a little bit of Roy Marsden went a very long way. The cook was right to be proud of her work. Macey had always been suspicious of restaurants in London which claimed to provide authentic English food. She had never felt sure this was something to boast about. But she recognised after the first mouthful of the creamy watercress soup that her prejudices were unfair. The lemon sole with New Jersey potatoes and baby spinach leaves that followed was also delicious. And though at first she thought she wouldn't be able to eat any more, she found she did have room for the bread and butter puddings, served in little individual dishes. Tatiana ate enthusiastically as well, and continued with Kirill and Villiers when the Stilton cheese and port was brought in. Macey and Marsden had both given up. "Ah, you have no idea how I suffered not being able to eat what I wanted when I was a dancer. The first thing I did when Gilbert proposed to me was to go out to a patisserie and eat 3 chocolate eclairs." "You mean you only married me so you could eat cake?" complained her husband. "Well, it was a consideration, Gilbert. It's no fun always trying to be thin for the sake of your art, you know." Kirill looked slightly uncomfortable, as if he thought this last remark might be aimed at him. He turned to Villiers. "Sir Gilbert, earlier this evening you said you had some ideas about who might be behind these messages." Villiers sighed, took a sip of port and a piece of the Stilton before answering. "When I was made CEO of 7 continents, not all of the other directors were pleased. Some left. Thomas Alwyn, you remember him, Roy? When he resigned, he said to me, 'I didn't come here to be number 2. I thought the problems were all over. But now I think there must be somebody else in the team who wants to force me out.'" "So you want us to investigate people in the company, right?" asked Macey. "We'd have to be very careful. If word got out and people knew it was you behind it, then it could be very embarrassing." Marsden leant forward to speak. "Yes, you'll have to be careful, but I've thought of a good cover for you both. We want you to write an official biography of Sir Gilbert." Tatiana laughed so much that her husband was a little hurt. "It's not that funny, Tanya. Lots of top people have them written these days." She wiped her eyes with her napkin. "I'm sorry, but I will never get used to the respect paid to business people in the West. You know, in Russian the word business can sometimes be used to suggest something not quite right, something, something dodgy." "The difference is perhaps due to the Russian experience since Perestroika, Lady Villiers," Marsden replied. "But in the case of Sir Gilbert it would be—" "I know perfectly well what the difference is supposed to be, Dr. Marsden. I just question whether the difference between the 2 countries is as great as your so-called free press believes it to be. Your business criminals are just slightly more subtle, that's all. The results are very similar. It's what happens with capitalism. Tatiana flashed a look of such contempt at Marsden that Macey felt obliged to come to his rescue. But for our purposes, it's a good idea, Dr. Marsden. That way we can go around the company and ask anybody we like questions, and nobody will suspect anything. Villiers and Marsden looked pleased. Exactly, said Villiers. I think there are really only 3 people that could organise this sort of thing. Nancy Inovics, head of corporate governance, Dmitry Mishkovich, head of project and environmental management, and Eamon Fitzroy, the chief financial officer. You need to start with them. And then, of course, what about the connection with Kazakhstan? Interrupted Tatiana. I told you what was in the Swan Lake programme, didn't I? Marsden, who had been sipping mineral water and keeping his eyes down on the tablecloth and away from Tatiana, suddenly looked up as if he wanted to say something, and then stopped. Villiers considered her suggestion. Well, it might be worth looking into, eventually perhaps, but Kirill and Macey had better concentrate on the London end first. After all, that's probably where the hacking is being done. And I can't think of anybody I know from Kazakhstan apart from you and your sister. Who do we report to? Asked Kirill. You'll be too busy, Sir Gilbert. Eventually, I'd like a written report of what you find. Of course, if necessary, we can also arrange a meeting. Just email me. If I see your names, I'll check it. But normally, I want you to make a daily report to Roy. Eco Warriors London office is in Covent Garden, so after you spent the day at our headquarters in Hatton Garden, you'll have to meet up there and tell him what's happening. Marsden smiled. Yes, that sounds like a good idea. I look forward to working closely with you, Macey. He paused for a moment. And Kirill. He stood up. I'm afraid I must leave now, if I'm driving back to London. He hesitated, as if waiting for Tatiana to repeat her offer of a bed for the night. It didn't come. So, after many farewell bows, thanks and good wishes, he left. Macey's heart sank. To have to meet that man every day. Still, perhaps she could persuade Kirill to do it. Did you enjoy this week's episode? I hope so. If you did, tell your friends about it, and please rate the story on Apple or Spotify, or better still, write a review on my website, www.behindthebottomline.com. Next week in episode 4, Macey and Kirill find that staying at a luxurious country house with excellent food and charming hosts does not necessarily add up to a relaxing weekend. Unpleasant events are starting to accelerate, and the two of them need to try and find out what is going on fast. If you'd like to buy the book or the ebook version of 7 Continents, you can do so by visiting my bookshop on my website www.behindthebottomline.com, and there you can also find Peril in Venice, a thriller full of drugs, murder and adventure, set of course in Venice, and also a romantic comedy, Double Trouble. Nicholas and Timothy Aldridge, identical twins with very different lifestyles, change places and cause huge amounts of trouble before finding fortune and true love. So, until next week, take care and goodbye.